here and online. So in this last panel, we have with us four amazing speakers to discuss the political repercussions of diaspora mobilization, but also the larger post-2011 context in which diaspora politics operate, with implications for both the homeland and the host states. We have kind of two theoretical perspectives with Dana Moss, who is online, and Fiona Adamson, echoing to some extent the first panel we had this morning. And then we will have two kind of empirical case studies with El Sayed and Ula, who will talk about respectively the Iraqi Shia diaspora and the Egyptian diaspora. So I will briefly introduce each our speakers. So Dana Moss. Can you hear me, Dana?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Perfect. Hello. We don't see you, but we hear you.
Oh, okay. My video's on, so.
Here you are. So
hey,
Dana,
everyone.
Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Notre Dame. Her research and teaching focus on power and resistance, including the transnational repression of diaspora and refugee communities by authoritarian regimes. In the 2010s, Dana also helped to run the Yemen Peace Project, a non-profit organization dedicated to educating Western audiences about Yemeni politics, culture, the arts, and film. And her current research focuses on how members of the military resist participating in violence during wartime. Then we will have Ula Kadum, who gained her doctorate, her PhD at Warwick University in July 2017. And she is currently a Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow with a current project entitled Russian Diasporic Resistance Abroad, Solidarity and Anti-Regime Activism Since the Russian Invasion of Ukraine, exploring Russia's extraterritorial population and its anti-war resistance to Putin's regime. Her previous work explored political and religious transnationalism of Iraq diasporic migrant communities in Europe, focusing on the way transnationalism was used to support or challenge states and state building, political actors, civil society, and social movements, as well as effects on identity politics, religion, and nationalism. El Sayed Abdelhamid, he's a PhD candidate in social anthropology at the University of Manchester, and his dissertation is an ethnography of the pursuits of stability among post-2013 Egyptians exiled in Istanbul and Amsterdam. He worked as a researcher at the Aleppo Project as part of a CU's Shattuck Center on Conflict, Negotiation and Recovery, and his research interests also include politics of exile, state configurations, legacy of political violence, and the Arab revolutions. Last but not least, we have also Fiona Adamson, who received her PhD from Columbia University. She is a professor of international relations at the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS, University of London. Her research interests are in the international politics of migration, peace and security, diaspora politics. She is Associate Editor of Security Studies and an adjunct faculty member at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And of course, her research has appeared in several prestigious journals, and she's currently working on diasporic geopolitics and on the geopolitics of organized forced migration. So thanks a lot for being here and online, and we will follow the same as in the previous panel with 15 to 20 minutes for each speaker. And we will start with Dana online, who will talk about transnational repression of diaspora mobilization. So
I think I need the opportunity to share. Oh, good. Share screen. Okay, here we go. Oh, it says it's not turned on, so I'm going to try that right now. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be with you today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. We are fighting fires here in the United States with Trump's freezes to our research and all kinds of other hassles. So I really appreciate the opportunity to zoom in from where I am in Indiana and be with you all today. Today I'm going to be presenting a bit on transnational repression, which I'm sure to some extent has been addressed already. So hopefully I'm not repeating myself too much, but I'm very excited to talk talk to you a little bit about that today, and I'm just going to set a timer so I know where I am in time and space. Okay, here we go. All right. I can't tell it. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, thank you so much. All right. So hi, I'm Dana. I'm a professor at Notre Dame here in the United States. I'm primarily known at this point for my work on the Arab Spring abroad, which was a study of how Libyan, Yemeni, and Syrian diaspora activists mobilized before and during the Arab Spring. And through this research, I discovered a lot about the impacts of what we now know to be transnational repression. When I was first looking at how to write about transnational repression or even what to call it, I remember doing a Google Scholar search in 2015. Is anybody using this term? And there was very little out there. Now I am thrilled to be among a great company and among a group of emerging scholars, many of whom are with you and a part of the panel today that study this issue. So we're going to go over that a little bit, but I'm just really excited to be a part of this emerging subfield. And recently, last year, I had an edited volume come out with Sapira Furstenberg, featuring people like Gerasimos and featuring people like Fiona, who are addressing how transnational repression is reaching globally into diaspora communities and impacting their organizing activities, which I'll talk a little bit more about now. So it's really exciting that we have a subfield, and I'm just delighted to be a part of it and talk to you a bit about that today. Just to go over this, I'm seeing transnational repression pop up everywhere in academia these days, which is wonderful. But just for those of you who aren't as familiar, I thought we would define it briefly as the border crossing practices used by regimes and their allies to control diaspora groups, to coerce them to do what they want, and to also punish them for expressing what Albert Hirschman calls voice after exit. This has happened in many cases across the United States, Canada, and Europe, and other places I'm sure you've heard of in the news. Now, there are many forms that transnational repression takes. Obviously, some of the most severe involve lethal violence and physical violence, such as assassinations, kidnappings, renditions. There's also more insidious forms of transnational repression that occur broadly in the form of surveillance, which a lot of times happens through ICTs or information communication technologies like our smartphones, our social media accounts, our emails, and also threats, which not only happen online, but also in person as well. Regimes have been known to withdraw student scholarships if they're caught speaking any kind of disloyalty about the regime. Sometimes they freeze and destroy assets that people have in the home countries. They might, wreck your house. They might freeze your bank accounts. They oftentimes restrict mobility, which means that a lot of times diaspora members can't come back home, or they're not allowed to leave if they do visit their home country or maybe a third country that's participating in this. There's also a lot of slander and reputational harm that happens. Masih Alinejad, whose little newspaper story is featured here, has been relentlessly slandered in the Iranian state media for being a CIA agent and a stooge of the West, even though she's a human rights activist. Unfortunately, and Gerasimos, Fiona, many people here at this conference are absolute experts on this. We know that regimes sometimes have trouble reaching people abroad, or that maybe it's expensive for them to do so. So it's much cheaper for them to try to manipulate diaspora activists into doing what they want by coercing and punishing their significant others at home. Some of us call this a proxy punishment. It's also coercion by proxy. But essentially what this means is that if regimes can't reach activists, or in order to control what activists do, they oftentimes harm people at home that are still under the purview of domestic violence. Of course, some of the most important and well-known examples of this are Jamal Khashoggi and Omar Abdulaziz, who I had the great honor of meeting in DC for a conference with Saudi exiles last year. As you know, this Jamal Khashoggi was a critic of MBS, along with Omar Abdulaziz, who was a student at the time in Canada, and they had planned to launch a kind of counter propaganda to Mohammed bin Salman's campaign on Twitter. And due to spyware on their phones and other kinds of transnational repression, this was revealed to the regime. Khashoggi was brought under false pretenses to the Saudi-based the Istanbul-based Saudi Arabian consulate in Turkey, and was murdered brutally on the 2nd of October in 2018. Meanwhile, Omar Abdulaziz's family has been targeted in Saudi Arabia. To me, he's a hero. He's continuing to be active despite the enormous cost to him because he's in exile essentially forever. And his family and his friends have taken a huge hit for him expressing voice after exit. So this is just one famous example, a couple famous examples of this widespread and global phenomenon. Now, the cumulative research at this point knows a lot about the effects of transnational repression, and I've specifically studied a lot of the organizing that's happened in these communities. So we know that transnational repression doesn't necessarily prevent diaspora or exile activism, but we do know that it poses a deterrent and a huge threat to collective organizing and resistance in a number of ways. So allow me to summarize those briefly. Firstly, because people are under threat and they're under surveillance and they don't necessarily know who's surveilling them, this foments a lot of mistrust and division between diaspora members out of fear. It certainly isolates exiles who are being targeted and surveilled by regimes. When I was speaking to Syrians, for example, before the Arab Spring, they would say, well, we knew so-and-so in our community was an exile and nobody would talk to that person or want to be seen with that person because we knew they were under surveillance. So this creates a split between activist exiles and sort of everybody else a lot of the time. We also know that a lot of times what diaspora members have to do in order to protect people at home is to sever their ties with these people and refrain from communicating openly with them. So this is a kind of network breakage that happens because people in the diaspora are worried about the safety of people at home. And a lot of my research has shown that, this kind of transnational repression doesn't necessarily prevent activism, but it forces activists to engage in a lot of self-censorship that they wouldn't otherwise and promotes guarded advocacy. And guarded advocacy essentially means they can't come out fully as activists. They can't necessarily use their names. They can't always be seen in public doing what they're doing for human rights. So even when activists settle in democratic states, this makes the enactment of their civil rights and their political freedoms a really high-risk situation for them in ways that regular citizens, white privileged Americans, for example, are often not
Dana,
aware of. Yes.
sorry for interrupting, but we have a problem with sound, so can you wait?
Yes, of course.
Just 1 second. And also, we see your slides, but you don't go through. So,
Oh no. Oh
yeah.
no. That's not good. Okay, well, let's try, let's try something else. All right.
Yes.
All right, 1 second. Let's see what it does there. Hold on 1 second. Can you see the slides advancing now?
Yes.
No. Yes, no.
Dana, did you touch on something because the sound all of a sudden stopped appearing here for us? We hear you very far away.
No, I'm afraid I did not change the sound in any way. Mm-mm. Sorry, y'all. I'm not sure. I'm just doing my regular sort of sharing here and hmm. So you're not seeing me advance these slides. Okay. That's interesting.
Only one.
Can you hear me now? Is it the same or is it different?
Same.
It's the same, you're far away.
Okay. Let me stop sharing this for a second and try to share it again. I'm not sure what's going on here. What? Okay. All right. It says participants can now see your application. But yeah, I can see okay. Can you see me advance the slides now?
We see
I'm
your
advancing. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I can't hear you, sorry.
It's for people on Zoom. I think they don't hear you.
Oh, I'm afraid I have no idea what to do about that.
Yeah. Yeah, the sound effect is okay. It's okay. You can continue now. Sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so you can hear me somewhat?
Yes.
Okay. Can you um see me advance? Let me see if I can see myself advance the slides. There we go. I think there's a slight delay, but it is advancing now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sorry about all of that. What I was basically just saying a moment ago was that we know for a fact that transnational repression has a massive impact on the ability of people to organize in their home countries and in their host countries. Certainly in their host countries, their democratic rights, their civil liberties are being curbed. I'll go through some of this kind of briefly, just in case there are future technical things, but we know that Turkey, Egypt, and Iran are major perpetrators of transnational repression. We also know that they have partners and other types of regimes that repress diasporas with them, and I know that that's something that's going to be addressed in this panel. Let me just pause here. Are we doing okay sound-wise and slide-wise?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Okay, so some of the global threats in transnational repression are really important for people from the Middle Eastern region. We know, for example, that most of the victims of transnational repression that have been recorded by Freedom House, and these are recordings and data on some of the most egregious forms of transnational repression in the form of kidnappings, assassinations, and renditions. This is very much facilitated by a war on terror ideology, which justifies data sharing and repression cooperation for the purposes of so-called security between regimes. So we know that even states that are active perpetuators of terrorism are also using terrorism as an accusation against these human rights and democracy activists. And it's also the same case that even in Muslim majority countries, 78% of victims in Freedom House's data set are of Muslim identity and background. And this is also a convenient excuse for regimes such as China and Russia to crack down on populations that they view as undesirable or dissenting. All right. So we have a situation where major powers all over the world are not only perpetuating transnational repression, but they're also collaborating in it. So we have major players in addition to the ones that I just mentioned, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel are also have been documented as perpetuating transnational repression. As Dr. Adamson, who's in the house today and is one of my favorite people on this planet, has talked about, there are also non-state actors with political power, with reach into the diaspora. For example, some folks from the Kurdish community who use transnational repression coercively to try to gain resources from the diaspora for their own political and militaristic ends. So that's an issue. And then in addition to that, we have, again, as I mentioned, lots of non-Middle Eastern partners in crime. Russia, China, and many other regimes enact transnational repression on behalf of states with less capacity. So they might partner together to do so. And we know that democratic governments and populist illiberal regimes in, for example, the United States under Donald Trump, India under Modi, Italy, and other countries are also facilitating transnational repression both directly and indirectly. I'm going to go through some of the how and the why because I feel like we need to be mindful of the time. The main point of this presentation is that some things have changed and some things have remained the same since the onset of the Arab Spring. So we have a situation where, okay, here we go. So obviously, in certain of the cases that I was studying prior to, or I was studying during the Arab Spring, a lot has changed. Unfortunately, in places like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, we have more repressive regimes that are actually leading in transnational repression, not only in the region, but across the world. We also have new regimes and fractured governance in places like Syria and Libya and Yemen, where I've studied previously, and Tunisia. And as of right now, given the fractured governance and the kinds of internal conflicts that they are dealing with, these states right now have less capacity to enact transnational repression. So many of the groups that I studied previously that were almost totally silenced prior to the Arab Spring, like the Syrians, for example. They were heavily punished by transnational repression, are now speaking openly about different issues in Syria, traveling back and forth to Syria. It's quite amazing. So there have been major changes there. So it's not that everything has remained the same. On the other hand, we also have this sort of third group of states where incumbent regimes have managed to hold on to power. They may continue to facilitate transnational repression in places like Jordan, Morocco, Oman. They are not the main perpetrators in terms of empirical, quantifiable data, but they are certainly complicit and facilitating it. In addition to that, we have increasing anti-asylum seeking regimes in the West, as well as in democratic states, as well as anti-migrant policies. So in these far-right leading states that are often destinations for people, there's often blockages, people are being incarcerated, and people are being deported back to their home countries. And one of the major challenges we face is that there's a lack of coordination. There's a lack of policies within states to combat transnational repression, even as awareness is growing. And so this can make communities much more vulnerable. And we do need further research to see how this changing landscape and how this changing configuration of states is impacting diasporas in different host countries. Now, of course, there is also some good news. As I mentioned, just as awareness about transnational repression is increasing in academia, it's also increasing among host countries, and many of them have encountered different or built different capacities to start to deal with it and at least try to, if not prevent it, then at least deal with it on the back end. So over the past 10 years, we've seen massive new state-led initiatives in the United States, and this is occurring in places like the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in Germany, for example, in the Netherlands, in the UK, who are working to address both the security threats and the legal threats from a national security standpoint. Now, a national security standpoint has its limitations. At the same time, there are now new reporting mechanisms for transnational repression. There are now new legal protections for certain people, and there's certainly growing awareness. And in Congress, our US Congress, there's been a lot of debate, at least, about how to deal with this problem, and even bipartisan support, which is very rare in the United States these days. There are also efforts to try to increase security and trust among diaspora and exile communities, which is very useful since these communities are very understandably wary of the FBI and wary of bringing their problems to the police because they don't know what's going to happen or even if they're going to be trusted or protected. Now, at the state level, many more human rights oriented and open door policies for diaspora and exile communities are needed, obviously. In the United States, unfortunately, we're going to see a recension of this under the Trump administration, who is now planning to send our deportees to Guantanamo. I mean, it's totally totalitarian. In the United States, another issue is that our anti-migration regime makes the immigration enforcement, ICE, quick to arrest asylum seekers and even refugees on the basis of a red notice, which is issued through Interpol. And a lot of other people, Ed Lemon and others, have talked about this more than myself, but it's important to understand that even though certain parts of our government want to protect asylum seekers and view that as illegitimate, the practice still continues by other arms of the government. So sometimes our governments are at the same time promoting protections while also taking them away. And I think it's important for us to unpack what's going on in these host countries and in these states to look at this contradiction. Another thing that we now know is that social support, especially from civil society and states, and social capital really does help to offset the threats of transnational repression. The support of states, of course, is needed so that individuals are not forced to bear the burden of transnational repression in isolation. And we also know that civil society matters. Marcus Michelson, one of my favorite colleagues who's affiliated with Citizen Lab, has shown that when employers such as the UK-based BBC work to support their journalists who are facing transnational repression from Iran, they're able to withstand it and they're able to combat it better than if they're obviously left on their own. We know international Amnesty International does really important work to raise awareness about that. So civil society can have a huge impact in helping people with transnational repression. And there's also more evidence that legal advocates can start to sue governments, including the US government, for wrongful deportation and for violating international law and perpetuating transnational repression. So I think I'm about right on time, even with technical issues. So here we go. Just in summary and conclusion, and we can discuss this more. But obviously, transnational repression remains a major threat to diaspora politics and collective action, even as the configuration of state power and state capacity to enact it is changing across the Middle Eastern region. Certainly, other things are changing in a positive direction as well. There's more collective awareness of this problem, much more than there was 10 to 15 years ago, and more institutional capacity to resist it. Now, of course, at the same time, those of you who study authoritarian learning know this very well. Regimes are adapting and they are collaborating with each other to continue to perpetuate this practice. They have a lot of capacity to control social or to oversee social media, to infiltrate our smartphones. And unfortunately, the work that, our lifestyles and the activism makes this connectivity necessary, and it also exposes people to these threats. We as scholars, academics, and activists need to continuously pressure power holders to combat this problem, even in the United States with the intransience and the just complete what of the Trump administration. There are people still in Congress and in the government who are interested in protecting people, at least from a rule of law and national security standpoint. Civil society does a great job with this as well. And really what we need our young scholars of transnational repression to do is to show how these communities are being impacted differently now and how host country responses are changing. So thank you all very much, and apologies for the technical issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. We will now listen to El Sayed, who will talk about post-2013 Egyptian exile in Istanbul and the shifting Egypt-Turkey relations. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and grateful to be here. Thank you for organizing this. So what I will be presenting is part of a bigger project. Is actually the conclusion of my PhD ethnography about diaspora and transition, about post-2013 Egyptian exiles in Istanbul moving to Amsterdam to apply for asylum. So this presentation is about how they are in transition. So showing the shifts of before and after. Okay. So I will start during my field work. I stayed 18 months in Istanbul. During my field work, I ended up focusing on and writing about pursuits of stability, istikrar, how people feel stable after being in an exile, and how they would imagine settlement and resettlement, and focusing on international relation between Egypt and Turkey. Turkey and Egypt wasn't actually planned at all. And as an anthropologist, I am always immersed in what's happening in front of me. However, those kind of international regional dynamics became part and parcel of understanding the local situation. So what I will be doing is actually going from the bigger to the smaller, from the regional dynamics to individual level, while my perception or my analysis went actually the other way around, because focusing on the local and going up. So before talking about the local dynamics, I will start by very quick timeline of regional alliances in the MENA region, then focusing mainly about relations between Egypt and Turkey, and then going into the diasporic dynamics in Istanbul and then to Amsterdam, focusing basically as the topic of this panel about the political repercussion of their political mobilization. Again, very quick timeline of the alliances in the MENA region in the beginning of 2000, after the invasion of Iraq and the rise of the AKP party in Turkey, the rise of what has been known internationally, especially in the West, as a Turkish model, which is the mix of between neoliberalism, capitalism, and political Islam, which was dubbed at the same time domestically in Turkey as also immersion of new Ottoman views of the AKP regime, which is focusing foreign policy intervention and interest in the MENA region and the Arab world generally. This drive up to 2011, the Arab Revolution and the revolution in Egypt. Turkey was one of the main actors intervening in supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Up after 2013, the military coup in Egypt, many Muslim Brotherhood started since 2013 to go to Turkey as political exiles, fleeing repression from Egypt, and non-Muslim Brotherhood activists also started to go to Turkey, since Turkey was one of the main places as receiving people as transition or as a transit or staying there for settlement. In the background of this, again, after 2011, regional dynamics started to take place. Two main fronts started to crystallize, let's say, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, which is the Saudi front, the counter-revolutions now, basically, and more the Irani front, or more pro-Iran front, Iran, Syria, Iraq, part of Yemeni, while a third backer, which was Turkey and Qatar, which was seen as supporter of the political Islam, supporter of terrorism in the region. So Turkey and Qatar was seen in the middle of these two fronts as backers of the political Islam, and also here emerges relations between the AKP and the Muslim Brotherhood, or AKP and Nahda, etc. And that's how some of the people I focused out ended up in Istanbul. Of course, now things changed after what happened after 7th of October, Syria, etc. But I am talking about back then, about this. Then here is Turkey. Okay, that's the somehow the regional dynamic. What about Egypt-Turkey relation? Even before the 2011, Egypt and Turkey had very strong economic relation with the start of the revolution. Erdogan was one of the main investors politically, culturally, and economically with the Muslim Brotherhood. In Egypt, cooperation agreements were in high level. There was an establishment of high strategic office between two countries. This all partially disrupted, especially politically. Economic relation continued, partially disrupted by the military coup in 2013. Erdogan started to criticize what's happening in Egypt, and directly and indirectly, dynamically, people start to flee to Turkey, and Turkey started to receive Muslim Brotherhood. in 2019, 20, no, before the 2013, Egypt expelled the Turkish ambassador. There was a cut of diplomatic relations between the two countries, and each one is insulting one another, etc. A lot of discursive battle that is going on. However, in 2019, 20, there were many disagreements about intervention in Syria, about Lebanon, and then about intervention in the Horn of Africa, and then with Libya, Turkish military intervention in Libya, which is a neighboring of Egypt. 2019, talks between the two countries started for normalization. This happened in the context of in which Turkey started to have there was a foreign policy revisions and a path of normalization between Turkey and other countries like Egypt, the Gulf, Armenia, and other countries. And in this context, it happened that I went to Istanbul, which is 2022, 2023, 2024, which is my field work where the normalization is happening. So basically you have like a 10-year of diplomatic cut. And now there is a shift in the international relation between the two countries and a diaspora that is partially being in between both countries, and from the other side is in Turkey trying to mobilize against the Egyptian regime back in Egypt. Before talking about the political repercussion of activism, that's very quick and rough overview of what people were just happening, what people were doing there as a political mobilizations or political engagement. So some of the opposition TV opposition channels were launched from Istanbul. Turkey provides space for an infrastructure for hosting these kind of opposition channels, some or frequent protest about what's happening in Egypt, a massacre or any kind of events of political violence. Egyptian could have certain limit of freedom to protest in Istanbul against what's happening in Turkey. Also, the Muslim Brotherhood had different ideological division while in exile in Istanbul, and this also had, as I will explain later, an impact of what's happening also in Egypt. And lastly, and that's complicated, I can talk about it more. Some Egyptians started to have facilitations of legal statuses, whether permanent residency or Turkish citizenship or exceptional visa permits to enter the country, or residencies to stay legally in Turkey, which will also change later with the change of with the change of the international relation between Egypt and Turkey. So with these kind of different forms of political engagement happening even before the start of the normalization between the two countries, there has been individual incident of that political repression against the diaspora, or for many diaspora members, that basically Istanbul is not a safe space for being here as a diaspora member or as a member who want to be politically active or politically engaging with what's happening in Egypt. This crystallized and intensified more once there was an non-official then official talks between Egypt and Turkey, and that there will be normalization between both. So about the political repercussion, I tried to divide it into three level and layer analysis. Of course, all of them are intersecting, but just to methodologically to put things into perspective. So things that are targeting diaspora members themselves, whether in Turkey or whether in back in Egypt and their families in Egypt. As we're talking in this morning about the securitization of diaspora policies in the host country and in the sending country. This was the case in Istanbul. So first in Egypt, some people who were in Egypt were arrested, for example, after appearing in the TV channels that are hosted in Istanbul as disturbing public orders or supporting terrorism, etc. So this increased the securitization of whatever happening in Istanbul to back in Egypt. Egypt is good. One of the good things about Egypt that they about the Egyptian regime that they enlist most of the political dissident into international terrorist lists. So most of the people who after 2013 have been listed in international and regional terrorist lists, and those people are being strategically caught or intimidated in Turkey as being asked by Interpol, for example. So some arrests had happened in Turkey that, okay, your name is in the Interpol, you need to come, be investigated why you are in Interpol list, and you need to prove that that basically these kind of charges are fake. And usually, since the majority of people are in these international lists who are in Turkey, sometimes you could say that these kind of intimidation by the Turkish authorities are strategic and intentional, because they select certain people and tell them, okay, tell me why you are in this particular list, or you are in this particular list, although everyone knows how Egypt is using this strategically, and there have been some interests in Europe, arrests in Europe have been in the Interpol list, and their arrests are being they are released because we know that is being used for political purposes. Thirdly, Egypt in 2019, I think, revoked a nationality of the Egyptian citizenship of an Istanbul-based activist, which is not a pattern to revoke the nationality, since most of the Egyptian who are in Istanbul are they are banned from their documents, from their passports, from renewing or getting passport, from getting a birth certificate, from having basic political and rights or documents. So practically speaking, they are stateless, but there was a step of revoking the nationality of one political activist. This has also become a problem for the first generation or the kids of the Egyptians, because they don't have any Egyptian papers, and it's a big deal to legalize them in Turkey, since they don't have ID documents unless they get the Turkish nationality, which is no longer an easy thing to get. Okay, 3 minutes. Threats always about the deportation to Egypt from Turkey as well, and what's happening also regionally, that Egyptians who got the Turkish nationality are being threatened to be deported to Egypt, and this happened just 2 weeks ago when an Egyptian visited Syria, and while coming back to coming out of Syria to Lebanon, Lebanon deported him to Emirates because of charging against insulting Emirates, etc. And there are now big restrictions on who's being renewed the legal statuses, who's getting the Turkish citizenship, and all of this is politicized. So that's in the diaspora individualized, quote unquote, members. On the dynamics or on a more sociological perspective, this created a theme of fear, an atmosphere of fear among many people, and deportability theme that everyone feels that they are not stable, they want to, they will be deported. I focused mainly about non-elite activists, which is they are a diaspora within a diaspora or a minority within the minority, and those people who are always feeling deportability since they couldn't get the nationality, or they couldn't get a legal status, a status which ended up in geopoliticizing their own lives and political trajectory. Lastly, about the host and sending state between Egypt and Turkey, migration in Turkey, migration governance is used as a geopolitical leverage for geopolitical purposes and economic purposes, especially in the governance of refugees. Syrian case is very known. The Egyptian case is less and less known, but the strategic manipulation of it is under studies. And also until now, Egypt does not allow, as an Egyptian, you need a security permit to travel to Turkey. But as a Turkish citizen from an Egyptian descent, you also need a security permit to enter Turkey. Few concluding mark. I'm sorry, 1 minute. My intellectual gained this awareness of interpreting their lives within a geopolitical perspective, that very small actions are being interpreted in a geopolitical aspect, like somebody's arrested, should I announce it or not? But if I announce it, they might arrest my I don't know, whatever. So this kind of faculties that they are developed. And lastly, to not take me, I followed my intellectuals who left Istanbul to apply for asylum in Turkey because of these kind of political repercussions of their engagement and the unsafe atmosphere in Turkey. That's how it started. That's how it started with the Rabaa sign. That's how it ended when he visited Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you, El Sayed, for this presentation and to bring in foreign policy and regional dynamics that also have an impact on diaspora. So perhaps you can guys go there. And since we have, I think, only 20 minutes left, yeah, maybe you can go there. I will directly open the floor for discussion. So if you have any question, maybe also on Zoom, please. Yes.
Thank you. Is Dana still around?
Dana is on.
Thank you all very much. It was very nice to wrap the day with all these conversations. Then I have a question for you. Can you hear me? Hi. I don't know where to look. Hi. I was really, we were having conversation after the last panel, and someone here said, we tend to talk about very dark things in a rather positive way. So I just want to say I really appreciated the talking about very dark concepts in a very engaging way. as we post-December 8th and October last year, it's been quite a dark year, at least, I mean, a dark decade, but particularly dark year for North Africa, Western Asia. And I was struck by something you said about how civil society can help. And I'm sort of in search for some hope. So can you share a few examples where you actually thought that civil society efforts did help, be it to protect or to free or to avoid more occurrences of transnational repercussions for dissent? Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful question. Yeah, this is really, really important. I mean, I got into the study of social movements and revolutions because I was looking for hope. I think my discipline does a great job of looking at the dark side of human society, and we need to find the light also. There's been an incredible increase in transnational repression stemming from Israeli state policy that's been reaching into the United States and Europe. And so I completely understand your concerns on a lot of levels. One thing I've also noticed is that at the same time, when diasporas and again, I don't mean to homogenize this population. Let me be more specific. When people who are both victims and survivors of transnational repression and activists get together and are able to form coalitions with existing organizations that have the capacity and the experience and a lot of funding to combat these kinds of practices, then we find that there tends to be a much more of a protective capacity for them to do their work. So when I was at the first ever, it might have been the first ever Saudi Arabian Exile publicly pronounced conference in Washington, D.C. last year, they were working alongside Amnesty International in order to promote awareness about people who had become political prisoners in Saudi Arabia, many of whom were victims of proxy punishment or this coercion by proxy process. And what that allows is it allows the burden of the response, mobilizing over time, capacity building to come off of the weight of individuals in the diaspora, as well as their organizations, which tend to be influx and strapped for cash and largely based on volunteers, right, who are just doing this out of principle, out of the goodness of their heart, because of their home ties. It allows them to start to build the capacity to mount a long-standing fight against these regimes that are perpetrating these atrocities, to bring the names and the situations into the public sphere and to do more naming and shaming. Now, that kind of civil society defense, I also mentioned the BBC trying to protect its journalists from Iran in the UK who were victims of transnational oppression. It doesn't necessarily mean that these organizations can solve the problem of transnational repression, but it does certainly mean that organizations, community groups, and victims of transnational repression receive prolonged support, attention, awareness building, and sometimes protection for their work and for their families back home. And it also can bring it to the attention of lawmakers who, for example, in the United States, have passed some pretty important legislation over the past 6 years to try to combat transnational repression from states such as Russia. So I do think that it's a constant back and forth. Civil society is very much under threat in a world that's being cast under the shadow of global authoritarianism right now. But at the same time, these kinds of relationships and coalition building can give organizations in different diasporas the support that they desperately need to launch campaigns that can go on the offensive a little bit rather than just being on the back foot. So as a social movement scholar, I'm always looking at where are people building coalitions. This is oftentimes how we build people power from the ground up, to address Fiona's point about the importance of power. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for your question.
Quick question on El Sayed, because I really liked your project. And what you identified as this personalistic aspect in terms of how diaspora relations are affected by the changing relations between Sisi and Erdogan. Is this, as a political scientist, right, is this something generalizable? Like, as an Egyptian yourself, do you see it in terms of Egyptian diaspora politics elsewhere in Europe or in other parts of the Middle East, in terms of how Sisi relates to leaders in Europe, Merkel or after Merkel, or somebody in Qatar or MBS? Or is the Egyptian-Turkish relationship really just very, very unique in terms of this phenomenon. So thank you.
Thank you, all of you. I just have a small question or a small comment, I don't know. But what about people of the old regimes and their diaspora? People from the collapsed regimes collapsed in 2011 because you highlighted how geopolitics and regional environments can shape regime change and political transitions. But what about the influence on non-regime change dynamics, as we saw in Libya and people from the old regime going back to Libya since few years, and I think it's an issue that we need to think about, particularly in the light of what is happening now in Syria and the future of Syria and the history of Syria also.
Thank you for the question about the personalistic aspect of Sisi and other. I think it depends where exactly we are looking. So in the Arab world, I think it happens in two levels. Sometimes it's as an interpersonal relations. For example, Sisi with bin Salman. So you have deportations from Saudi Arabia, or in the Arab level. So you have the Arab Interpol or the Arab Ministers of Interior, which intersect with the it's a regional organization as part of the Arab League that intersect with the international Interpol. So, and then you have deportations from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Emirates under this legal framework, not the first one, which is more interpersonal, basically as a favor, between the two leaders. So that's in the direct format of it. The indirect, I would say, especially here in Europe, for example, the first visit of Sisi after coming to Bar was in Germany, since many people left to Germany to apply for asylum. I did my MA field work in Berlin, and this resulted into over time Germany and now almost all European states is not recognizing Egypt as a non-safe third country of origin. So it's hard for Egyptians to apply for asylum, generally speaking, unless they have very targeted cases. So again, it depends which level or scale you're looking at. Second question about the old regime. I mean, the old regime now in power, so they don't need to go to go into diaspora. But your second point about non-regime change, which I wanted to talk about very quickly. I think one point that Thomas in the beginning mentioned about the demobilization, which I write a lot about it. That's why I said some of it is non-elite activists or non-activists to start with, about people who quote unquote partially became depoliticized or left politics, at least in the organizational level. But at the same time, now you have different forms of engagement, like social science education that's happening in Exile from Istanbul, for example, podcasts on YouTube. So it's not non-direct protest or calling for regime change or awareness raising, or as Dima said, people are trying to chill out, which in this case trying to survive.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? No? So thank you so much. Thank you, Dana, as well, online. Yeah. So
Thanks everyone for
I
having me.
think we are going to end this day. Thank you all for coming. Thank you also online for joining us. I think it was a grateful day with very interesting discussions and presentations, questions, and I think there is a lot of further potential discussion. So maybe also due to the recent change, genocide in Gaza, the fall of Bashar al-Assad and so on. So yeah, much more discussion, hopefully. Thank you so much.